mentioned in the chat box. I will try to answer those questions which are important in nature, and I will try to cover all the questions. So, Rehan?
Yes, sir.
Shall we start? We are online?
Yeah, we are online. We can start.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, just a second. Thank you everybody for joining us. Let me introduce the speaker of today's webinar. We have with us Mr. Michael Skiba. He is very well known as Dr. Fraud. He is an international expert on economic crime and is referred as one of the top crime fighters in the world. He worked for several Fortune 500 companies for 22 years in investigation and is now an international consultant, trainer, and a speaker on fraud. Dr. Skiba is currently consulting with Inform, an international claims and fraud solution company, as a vice president of international counter fraud strategies, where he oversees global counter fraud projects. He has also been a university professor for 15 years and is currently a department chair of fraud management at Colorado State University Global. He also holds an MBA and PhD with a research focus on economic crime. He can be seen in many media outlets in NBC, CBS, CGM, XM Radio in USA, and a monthly publication column, Ask Dr. Fraud, the London Telegraph and Fox News Brazil. He is also an instructor for the US ATF and a member of the Academic Council of the United Nations Systems. He is an accomplished author and recently published a book titled The Psychology of Fraud. Dr. Fraud is also founder of the Dr. Fraud Training Group, host of a Fraud TV, blogger, and www.drfraud.org. Dr. Fraud, I could say thank you very much for accepting our invitation. We all sat here on behalf of National Forensic Sciences University. I welcome you. We have with us our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Dr. J.M. Vyas sir is also with us, and he will be joining during this whole webinar. So, thank you for joining us, sir. Welcome in this.
Yeah, thank you, and welcome, Dr. Fraud. I am very keen to listen to your talk. Thank you so much.
Very nice. Nice to meet you too. And I look forward to dialoguing with you in the group for sure. Yeah, very excited.
Yeah, definitely. It will be a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Yes, Mr. Michael, you may go ahead, please, with the presentation. Rehan, can we please share the screen?
Yes, sir.
Yes, Mr. Skiba, over to you.
Okay, perfect. Fantastic. And then what I can do is, yeah, as I go through, if whoever has control can just scroll along with me, would that be, yeah, that work for you guys? Perfect. Okay, great. Yeah, okay, fantastic. So first of all, as mentioned before, really great to be here. I know it's early my time, but I'm an early riser anyway, so this is really fantastic, you know, and I really look forward to talking with you all this morning about, or this afternoon to you about a topic that is near and dear to my heart. And as Harish had mentioned, I have so much experiences in this area, and I just love to share things that I've learned from the US and from around the world, basically. And this is what I really love about what I do, is because I've been able to really talked to so many people and consulted with so many different carriers. I call it looking under the hood of all these different cars, and it's exciting to me because I can look at banks and credit card companies, government agencies, private carriers, and really see and dive into fraud at such a granular level. And this is what I want to bring to you all as those experiences, because what I want you to do is I want you to be able to take some of these things back with you to your respective professional positions. And you might not need them now, but you can file those away, so when maybe these things do come up, you remember, oh yeah, this is what I could do here, or this works, or et cetera, et cetera. So this is what I'm really excited about doing at this point in my career, and also to share with you this morning. So what we're going to talk about today is a very interesting area. It has to do with corporate and occupational fraud. And I think no matter where we sit in our organization, it is such a high exposure situation. And I think a lot of companies and agencies maybe don't realize how much of an impact that this really is. And I'm going to give you some very practical examples of cases I have been involved in and what happened and how we could have detected it. Unfortunately, Dr. Fraud does miss some cases. But what we're going to do is we're going to talk about some of those situations and how we can learn from those mistakes and that the companies made in that detection, so we can then develop very, very strong strategies going ahead. So that's the goal this morning, and I really look forward to dialoguing with you. As Dr. Harish had mentioned, I love to hear from you. So I really want to support you on your journey, your academic and professional journey. So please find me. I'm all over. You can find me through the website and all social media. I do lots of postings, and there's resources on there for you. And I'm more than happy to assist any of you with support on an academic or professional level. So that being said, I'm really excited to talk with you today. As Dr. Harish mentioned, he's going to be monitoring the chat. So please, I'm welcome to more of an informal approach. If anyone has questions and we can manage those and get those to me, I'd be more than happy to talk with you online right now, or of course afterwards as well. So I'm looking forward to developing a future relationship with the organization, with the school, the institute, and you all here this morning. So that being said, let's dive in and roll up our sleeves and talk about corporate and occupational fraud. So here's what's really interesting, just to start off and set the stage with this type of fraud. We look at external fraud. We look at all different areas that are coming at us. It's kind of like the shield. As an organization, we want to put that up and try to find our threats and where they're coming from. But what's really interesting about corporate and occupational fraud is that stems from our internal nucleus of our organization. Okay, so a lot of these scams and schemes that we're going to talk about today are developed internally, and this is the conundrum when I do this type of training is, these are people that we employ, that we onboarded, right? And this is what's interesting, because we went through that whole process of interviewing and background checks and things like that, and we would think we would do a good job of filtering it out. But what I'm going to talk to you about today is how it's very difficult at that onboarding stage to identify these individuals. And we're also going to see how much of a threat that this can be. Okay, so the roadmap here this morning is, first off, we're going to talk about some very disturbing statistics. We're going to give you some really granular level things in trends and tactics and areas that are specific to you in your region. We're then going to transition into the psychological element of the financial criminal. And why that's important, why it's important, is because we always have to understand who we're up against. We always have to understand our enemy. If it's in business, we have to understand our target market. If it's a session or training you're giving, you have to understand your audience, right? So this is key. So what we have to do is understand the mindset. Okay, what motivates these financial criminals? What motivates them to do what they do? And that's key, because how can we develop strong strategies if we don't understand what is motivating them? So that's the roadmap, is we're going to talk about all these different scams and schemes up front, ones that are important to you in your region that I see. Then we're going to develop an understanding of the psychological elements, what the motivating factors are. Then we're going to transition, because at the end of the day, you could be thinking, well, yeah, this is great, but what can I do with it, right? So at the very end, we're going to talk about very, very specific strategies for detection, and what I call a two-pronged approach. And that would be human element and a technology element. So we're going to look at ways when if you bring those two things together, you develop a very, very strong counter fraud strategy. Okay, so that's kind of the roadmap that we're going to take this morning, and we're going to dive right in now. So what I'd like to do first is talk about corporate and occupational fraud, and specifically the sector that we operate in. And what I will say is we are at very, very increased risk in the whole fraud space. When I look across all different spectrums, all different types of countries, all different types of industries, our area is at increased risk. And I'll tell you why. We operate in the financial services sector. So if you think about this, the name finance is simply in our title. We have the word money in our industry, right? So that draws the criminal element to us, okay? So one, we are considered by others, external and internal, okay, as having money. So we are a very, very rich target to start with. Now, secondly, here's another issue that I'm seeing, is we are seeing an incredible trajectory in technology. Incredible. Things that I have seen, I'm seeing statistics come through now that I've never seen before. So a recent study which concluded that there's going to be more data in circulation in the next few years, the next 2 years, let's say, than ever in human history. I mean, if you can imagine and fathom this, it's absolutely incredible. So if you take from now to all the information prior and bucket that, put that in a bucket, between now and 2 years from now, you're going to have a bigger bucket coming down the road. So this is what's interesting, and this is what we all have to focus on, is that data, the information, all that's being put in circulation, because it might not be an issue at this specific moment for you or your organization, but I guarantee it will be very, very quickly. Because what I'm already seeing in companies and organizations that are a little bit behind the curve, and even in advanced areas like the United States, where we have a lot of technology, we have a lot of things we can use. Companies that are just falling a little bit behind, now you're seeing very, very high impact, that they're starting to get in trouble now. You know, I'm hearing, some internal workings of these companies having problems. So this is a thing that we need to keep on our radar, is how to harness that information and the data. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit in the detection section. Okay, so another interesting factor when we talk about technology is devices, right? Everybody right now within arm's reach. If I were to say, okay, everyone just touch how many devices around them, you probably at least have one, maybe two, three. I have three right now, okay? So this is what's interesting when we talk about technology and devices. When we look at the number of devices, okay, and we call those connected devices, and it could be a wearable, it could be a watch, an Apple Watch, it could be a phone, iPad, any type of connected device. As of 2 years ago, there were 15 million in circulation, okay, 15. And this year, at the end of this year, there should be, if statistics are correct, the trajectory is going the way it is, 50. Okay, so 2 years we have 15 million. At the end of this year, we should have 50 million of these connected devices in circulation. Now, here's what I'm getting at with this. All of this stuff, everything we have here, puts information out into the system, okay? Whether it's appliances, smart TVs, smart light bulbs. I've seen these being linked to phones. I mean, you all know of this technology, right? So all this is putting information into the system, into this ecosystem that we're operating in. Now, what that does is if all that information is going out there at such a increased level, right? So if we have just this incredible amount of information out in circulation, and I don't know if can we see that from where we are? Is it kind of faint, hopefully? I have to draw a little bit darker. So here's all this information that's being circulated right now, right? Now, if our detection strategy now focuses on just this little piece, okay, all of this here is our threat, okay? 75% of that area is a threat to us, okay? So this is what we have to focus on. We have to adjust our strategies. So now we're focusing here, okay? So we need to kind of understand how we can harness that information, because even though, like I said, some of those companies are falling behind, by the same token, the ones that are harnessing that are working on this big ecosystem of information, they're doing a fantastic job because they're harnessing that power of the information. Okay, and it's not hard. I'm going to show you some tips and tricks to kind of utilize there. Okay, so again, the first step in this is to understand that this is a huge problem in our industry, and this is what I see, you know, the criminal element being drawn through on many levels. Okay, the external and also the internal, the corporate and the internal fraudsters. So this is where we are at an increased risk. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to actually get into some of the areas of corporate and occupational fraud. So I want to talk about some statistics with you. So when we talk about the cost of fraud, what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to just ponder for a minute. And you can even do this in your notes or something along the side. I want you to think a little bit about what the cost of fraud is. And this is the first kind of question. We're going to go through all of these and we're going to discuss these a little bit. Okay, so I want you to think to yourself, what do you think is the global cost of fraud? Just kind of ponder for a minute. Maybe have an idea in your mind. You know, maybe jot it down for a second. So here's what's interesting, okay? Studies show that the cost of fraud, this is what I've seen, and I with my statistics, if you need the exact source, please let me know. What I usually do with all of this information, it's a compilation of probably 20 different sources, because quite frankly, I see so many different things across the spectrum being reported, and it's my job. I'm also you know, heavily into academics, so I see a lot of things come in. So I have to filter that out, I think, for your benefit as well. But here's what I see. So the overall cost of fraud is about 3.2 trillion. Okay, so imagine this for a second. I don't think I have enough zeros on my board here. $3.2 trillion. Okay, is the global cost of fraud. Now we're including all different types of fraud in that. Okay, so corporate and occupational fraud is a piece of that. Okay, studies show it could be a half of that, could be about a third of that. But herein lies the problem right off the bat. Here's the problem with trying to quantify the actual cost of fraud. Because when I did a research study about 3 years ago, and I canvassed 50 different financial services companies, right? And I asked them, how do you actually measure fraud, right? And you would be surprised of how many started off with kind of like a hesitation, you know? I mean, and these were heads of fraud and division level individuals that should know this information. There was a lot of hesitation because it was, well, what do you mean? Well, no, I just want to know, what are your metrics? What are your KPIs for measuring fraud? So once I got to the point of what I was looking for, across the board, every company had a different way to measure fraud. You know, some were by detection only when it was first detected. Some were after a case was prosecuted. I mean, there were so many different areas to look into that it was daunting. You know, and the conclusion of my study was basically that there was no consistent approach to this measurement. Okay, so this is so hard when you see these numbers, and I get asked a lot from my students, you know, how can I quantify this? This is the problem. So I always, whenever I put this on, I put the disclaimer that this could be different. This could be twice this number. It could be half that number, because it's really hard to quantify. And I'll give you an example. If you prevent, You know, if you prevent an internal criminal, an internal employee from taking, from skimming, let's say, or cash on hand, or you know, avoiding this type of activity. Let's say you don't have the person arrested, but you bring up some internal kind of sanctions against them, right? How do you quantify what you prevented in the future for that person? But because technically that's part of fraud prevention, right? So if you stop them from stealing $1 a day, you know, the next week, is it, do you save $7, or do you multiply it by a year? So this is what's hard. So just understand, any operations, anything you're doing in this space, in this fraud world, it's really, really hard to quantify what we're talking about. So I would always question, you're all academics, of course, you know, question those statistics that you're seeing, you know, really dive in and look at how, if it's a study, or even within the certain corporate setting, really question those metrics. How are we capturing this data? Is it accurate? And does it really represent what we are trying to measure? And what I would recommend here, and I'm going to get this into prevention, is whatever method that you choose to measure fraud, because this is really key when we get into prevention, is developing a KPI. Okay, this is your KPI, and stick with it. It doesn't matter that, you know, every company, all of your colleagues on this call could have a different way that they measure their corporate internal fraud or even external fraud. And it's okay. Whatever works for your strategic organization and your business strategy and your fraud strategy, it's okay. But just make sure that you stick with that KPI, okay? Because that's the way that you're going to show success or opportunity areas, okay? So that's one recommendation for prevention. So I know we're jumping ahead, which I really want to key in on that point, okay? So cost of fraud, always be questionable about that. All right. So now, when we get into the average loss per case, so think about that for a second. So how much do you think the average is per loss of a occupational internal corporate fraud case? So just ponder that for a second. So the research shows that the average loss per internal case is about, and this is US dollars. Okay, about $130,000 is the average loss per case. Okay, now that is incredibly statistically powerful. Okay, so what's interesting about that is that 130,000 is such this is a number that should really surprise you, because you would think when we get into the actual different types of cases, 130,000 across the board, and this is the average. Now think of some companies. I consulted with some smaller size companies. I mean, this over a course of time, over years, can really add up into a multi-million-dollar situation and a threat. So depending on your corporate situation, these types of cases, you're going to see by the other statistics, these don't go away, you know, unless these individuals are caught. And what I see personally, is the trend with internal and corporate fraud. It goes up, right? So it might start. I worked with I interviewed several individuals, and they started off with $30, right? $30 invoice skimming case, okay? Cash on hand, $30, right? And that grew, that actually was over 130,000. I think the final case was about, or the final fraud was about $250,000. So it grew from $30 to $250,000. And that is the trajectory. Usually this is what you see from a psychological level, is because when these fraudsters get a little taste of it, they get away with it on a smaller scale, it continues to grow. Okay, so this is the final number, but it often starts very, very small. Okay, so the average loss per case, about $130,000. Okay. Let's talk about the number of cases in excess of $1 million. Okay, now think about 1 million. Ponder that for a second. So how many cases over $1 million? So the average is 130,000. So the percentage of cases over $1 million. Now, again, think of the book. Think of the worth, gross written premium. If you're an insurance company, if you're a bank. You know, whatever metric you develop to to assess the health of your company, right? $1 million is an incredibly significant amount. I've worked with many companies where this could completely bankrupt them, right? So the number of cases in excess of $1 million is about 22%, okay? About 22% of cases. Think about that, right? That's about a quarter. 1/4 of the cases are worth $1 million, right? It's absolutely incredible. So what you have is you have a difference. You can see the difference in the two statistics I just gave. The 130,000, right? That's a little bit smaller number, but you're going to see those in higher frequency, right? These cases you're not going to see in high frequency, but look at the impact. So what happens is when you have a mix of both of those situations, you have a major, major problem on your hands, okay? So what I want to do then is I want to talk about the average length. And this is when it starts to get interesting, okay? So I want to talk about the average length of these schemes. And this is what's disturbing. So just think for a second. And if some of you have been involved in these cases, you know, you might have, some cases and ideas in your mind. But I have found in the dozens and dozens of cases I have been involved in, this is a very, very strong statistic. This is part of my input as well in my experiences. So this is going to be disturbing. So think about how long the average internal case happens, right? So you'd think maybe a couple months, right? 16 months, okay? So you're talking almost a year and a half that these cases actually continue, right? And this is very, very disturbing, okay? Because what this tells me is two things. One, it is not on a company's radar, okay? One, they're not thinking of this. This is too long. In external fraud cases we have, when we're looking at organized rings and things like this, the only reason they take that long is because usually we already started the investigation and the prosecution, and we're trying to work through the court system or whatever internal strategy that they have. But we've identified those early. These go on for 16 months before they're detected. Okay, so one, it's not on the radar, and two, if it is on the radar, companies are absolutely missing the mark with the detection in this area, absolutely missing the mark. Okay, so this should be very, very disturbing to you, this 16 months. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to ask. So we're kind of walking through this now. We're at number 5, the most common, least costly, and we're going to get into the very specifics on different forms in a minute. So if we talk about the most common, so again, now that we have some numbers here, we have the average length, we have some monetary values that go along with this, I want you to think of the actual types of fraud. So now we're going to transition a little bit. So what would you think the most common is, but the least costly? Okay, so most common, least costly. And we're going to dive into these different detection and different forms in a minute. So most common, least costly is asset misappropriation, okay? Now, this ties along. When we talk about the psychology, I want you to all remember this, because this is very important when we talk about the psychology of fraud and the psychology of these types of criminals. Because think about asset misappropriation. Asset misappropriation could be a very small element, okay? We're going to talk about, ways that the employees start very small, and this is what I see. And the way to do that, the most common type of fraud, the most common medium to do that is asset misappropriation. Okay, so that's the way, and that's why it's the most common, because it's they get away with it more, and then what you're going to see is then it grows. So that is the most common that you're going to see, but it's the least costly, because it could be padding an expense account, and I'm going to talk about that too. So these little snippets that happen will absolutely grow. Okay, so alternately, what would we think is the least common and most costly? Okay, so least common and most costly. So again, think of the trajectory here. So least common, maybe, and most costly. Okay. So this type of case is financial statement fraud, okay? And these are financial statement fraud, in my experience, is very contrived, okay? Because what you have to have is you have to have a certain level of authority to actually commit this type of crime. So what you're going to see here is you're going to see this is, of course, your Bernie Madoff. This is, of course, your Holmes. And if any of you are familiar with the blood company out west here in the United States, very big case. But this is the type of fraud that's involved here because it involves, you have to have access to information, right? You have to have access to the books and access to vendor reports and things like this. And this is actually how financial statement fraud occurs. So what you're going to see is you're going to see a direct relationship between financial statement fraud and the level of authority of these actual fraudsters. Okay, so we're going to see some slides on that actually show the level of authority and the type of fraud that they commit and the percentage of fraud that they commit. Okay, so now we kind of know, we're getting an idea of the different types of fraud to focus on. You know, ones that are the least costly and those that are the least costly but occur at higher frequency, and the alternate, the ones that maybe don't occur that much, but that could completely bankrupt the company, 22% that are over $1 million, okay? So the last two questions have to do with the perpetrators themselves. And again, this is kind of following on our roadmap and the psychology of these fraudsters. So think to yourself the number of perpetrators that had a prior conviction. Okay, so I want you to think about this for a minute. So the number of perpetrators, internal corporate fraud perpetrators that had a prior conviction, okay? So what we're getting at here is we're asking the question, do these individuals have a prior record? Did they have a propensity to commit this fraud before we onboarded them? You know, could we have found out that they had a propensity to commit fraud and they would potentially be a threat to us? That's the question we're asking here, right? So the number of these that had a prior conviction, okay, 4%. 4%, only 4% had a prior conviction. So think about this. That doesn't mean that they tried it and just didn't get caught. This means that this is a minuscule number. In statistical terms, I mean, this is almost insignificant, we call it, right? So 4%, what that means is that these individuals, they don't come into the company thinking that they're going to commit fraud. They have no prior history. Now, this is what's unique about corporate and occupational fraud, because when we're dealing with external threats in a banking environment, a government environment, corruption, things like that, we can assess that because usually what studies show us is those individuals have certain characteristics. They have certain traits. They're usually involved in suspicious or questionable activity in other areas. So there's little snippets that we can figure out, maybe this person is a high risk, you know, and we can identify those, filter those out, and develop strategies. These individuals are different because they don't have those clues and triggers. So this is what's really exciting to me, is because this is what gets into the psychological elements of fraud, you know, and how, okay, well, how does that 4%, how does that turn into an actual fraudster? And that's what's so interesting about this, okay? Because there's no propensity there. So it's all about opportunity, okay? And that's what I would say, you know, when I teach some of my classes, a lot of my students, they're busy. Every now and then one of them will come in and say, hey, you know, professor, I have to leave in 5 minutes. I'm sorry, I can't stay for class. Can you give me what do I need to know real quick? So this is what I'll tell all of you on the call. It's all about opportunity. Okay, so reduce opportunity. That's the only thing that you jot down today. Just remember, reduce opportunity. That is the key, because that ties all this stuff together. Okay, the psychological elements with prevention. Okay, so remember, 4% have a prior conviction. That's it, period. I mean, that's incredible. Okay, now I want us to explore the last question. Okay, the number of perpetrators that showed at least one behavioral red flag. So behavioral red flags are things that we've identified, you know, as an industry level, corporate level. These are things that you can grab off, you know, different industry websites, or, you know, even from myself if you need to. So these are behavioral red flags to help identify these types of fraudsters. So the number of perpetrators who showed at least one behavioral red flag. So think about this for a second. Okay, so okay, 85%. Okay, 85% showed one sort of red flag, one form of flag that we could have identified. Okay, so this is what's disturbing. Okay, so think about this for a minute. So only 4% have a prior conviction, but 85% show a flag. And think about that going back to number 4, the average length of the fraud scheme, 16 months. When we start to put that together, what does that tell us? That tells us, like I mentioned in the beginning, that companies are missing the mark with identifying these types of cases because most of them show a red flag, show some sort of indicator somewhere in that process. But we're missing the mark because we're only that's going on for 16 months. Okay, so this is what's disturbing. Companies need to focus on this. Absolutely 100%. Okay, so what I want to do now is we've identified, of course, that this is a problem. We need to focus on this. We looked at the global area of fraud and why this is just being funneled right to us. We focus on the different types of cases, the different statistics, and started to kind of get our mind working on the psychological element and why they are drawn to this area, right? Because they have no prior. It's a very strong statistic when you look at the lack of prior information, prior hints, prior triggers, only 4%, but coupled with the red flag statistic on 85%. So keep that in mind as we now start to actually work through some of these schemes. So we can just scroll up just a hair to the one on the top there, reach maybe.
Yeah, Rehan, next PPT. Yeah.
Just I'm sorry, just the second, the third. Yep. I meant down. I meant yeah. Sorry. Yeah, right there. Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, right there. It's awesome. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to talk about specific schemes. Now, this is specific to your region. Okay, but what I will say is that in my international experience, what I see is I see a lot of commonalities, and what I do see is I see the different types of schemes kind of moving around a little bit, but what I usually see is the same top 5 in pretty much every region, okay? Whether it's EMEA, whether it's your region, whether it's areas in North America, US, this is what usually that I see is these top 5. But it depends on but what I see is on a regional level, they're altered very slightly. Okay, so when we look at this, at the type of schemes that are a huge impact to you that I see as trends, even on a personal level, the first one we see, I don't know if it surprises anyone, would be corruption. Okay, so that's about half. This is the kind of thing that even in some areas, you know, when I do work in other areas of Asia, sometimes they don't even like to bring this up. You know, this is just a topic where, you know, they don't like to talk about it even. But it is important as fraud professionals for us to, you know, it might not, I know it's a sensitive topic to talk about, but we need to understand that this does happen and this is something to absolutely focus on, okay? I was involved in a very in-depth consultation with a company in your region, and this was an issue as I was involved in this for about a week when I had a few, let's say, I don't know how I should say this. I was approached by several people within the organization on some work that we were doing, because what we were doing is trying to figure out where they were losing. We're doing a full vulnerability assessment, which I'm going to talk about as a tactic. But I was approached kind of, I would say, yeah, threatened, because those people that were involved in that process were heavily ingrained in a lot of corrupt activities. And this happens quite frequently because there's a lot of money at stake. So corruption I have seen on a very, very deep ingrained level. So this is something that absolutely should be a focus on your radar, because I always see this as the number one. And the reason why, in my opinion, is because these are very high dollar cases, and corruption involves usually the mid to upper level tier of an organization. Okay, so these are people that have access. These are people that have, you know, a level of authority within a company. Okay, so So the next one down we see for you that should be a focus, the 25% would be non-cash. Okay, so non-cash is interesting because non-cash is really hard to track, and it really focuses on inventory. Okay, so I know a lot of what we deal with is intellectual capital, but non-cash could be any type of non-intellectual property. And in a normal setting, it would be inventory. It would be simply moving inventory around, or even just certain employees using items or taking items on a non-cash level. So it's ways to kind of thwart the cash system, but it's all non-cash assets. So again, it's hard to track, and that's where this becomes a significant issue. Okay. Now, where I see is one of the biggest problems, what I would recommend that everyone focus on, even before, because the thing is, when we talk about detection and prevention with corruption, that's huge. That's a big strategy, because that usually involves, as I mentioned, the case I was involved with, those at the upper level of the organization. But what I see with expense reimbursement, those strategies can be started at any level. So all of you at whatever level you're sitting at, an operational level, mid-level, low-level, high-level management position, you can focus on this expense reimbursement, because this is what I see. I see expense reimbursement as part of that trajectory that I mentioned earlier, right? Because what we see is little expense situations kind of being put under the radar. I traveled, I added a little bit extra, whether it's a per diem. I see this a lot, the per day allowed to spend a certain amount for dinners and things like this. This is where it starts usually. It usually starts here. And then what happens is, as I mentioned, this is where the mindset starts, right? Oh, I got away with this at this level, at this little level, and now it's going to grow. Okay, so this is absolutely what I see happen. The case, the $30 case I mentioned, that's how that happened. It started with the $30 expense reimbursement case, and then it developed because that employee got a taste of, well, hey, it's 30, then it was 60, then it was 90, then it was used as actually a supplement to his income. That's exactly the term that he used. Okay, so just something to keep in mind. That's what I would recommend focusing on. Then we have billing. Now, billing is another one. So I would say those would be my top two for prevention. The reason why billing, when we get into billing, what I bucket under billing is any type of vendor situation, vendor relations, vendor contracts, that is absolutely ripe for fraud. Absolutely. The statistics show that the percentage of fraud in those types of situations is very, very high, because a lot of those vendor relations are not policed. Okay, they don't really have any governing body or even just internal individuals that manage that process. Okay, so any vendor relations, anytime anything is outsourced, whether it's as hardcore as an investigative capacity or any type of even a software management system. I mean, it could be anything that's vendored out or that goes out into an external relationship. That is a very, very high propensity for fraud, because there could be kickbacks, there could be commissions, there could be a lot of informal things that kind of come into play here. So always keep an eye on billing. I would absolutely focus, if you have any type of vendor relations, that's huge. You know what else too? We see huge spikes, like when we have disasters. There is so much fraud that follows disasters, because with disasters, and when I say disaster, it could be man-made, could be natural, doesn't matter. You have spikes in activity, and you have an increase of companies to engage with outsized resources to supplement that, because they're so any type of external force that puts pressure on a company when they have to use vendor relations or outsource things more than usual, okay, that's an absolute spike. So I would 100% focus on that, okay? So those would be the top schemes that I would focus on. I wouldn't worry about the bottom ones, but what I want you to do is start to think in your mind, how are my companies using these? Are they using these? Start to develop your own ideas on ways that strategies are hitting the mark, but also missing the mark, okay? So if we can scroll to the next section here, we're going to talk about detection. So this is important because now what we're doing is getting into, well, how do we find this stuff? Okay, this is all great, but how do we actually figure out how to filter these cases out, right? So if we look at this, you know, it's really surprising because you know how I mentioned prevention should focus on two things, the human element and then the technology element. Okay, so this is what's interesting. Look at the way that most of those cases are detected. And this is in the APAC region, but what I have seen is this, the tip is pretty much number one, usually across the board in all the other regions, okay? So this is the highest by far. I mean, look at the difference in percentage, if you can read that. It's 42% compared to start, and then 14, and then it just completely dives from there. So most companies are detecting these cases by the use of a tip, okay? And I would absolutely recommend this. I've seen fantastic results. So even as simple as a hotline setup, this is what I would recommend. A tip hotline setup, a call center. It doesn't even have to be managed internally. This is something that, you know, I'm sure outsourced companies can handle for you. I would absolutely focus on this as a very easy strategy to start with because hotlines, they create that, anonymous nature. And sometimes what happens is, there's external things that happen that actually force people to report these types of cases. So let's say a fellow employee, you know, realizes that another employee is engaged in some sort of suspicious activity, and that really, you know, that other employee does not want to be known as kind of the tattletale or whatever term, the snitch or something like this, which is very strong. It's very strong in a corporate cultural environment. Right? But with the tip and the hotline, they can simply make it anonymous tip. They can just say, hey, somebody check out John Smith. Something weird is going on. That's all it has to be, right? Regardless of whether it's legitimate or not, it doesn't matter. But now that the company knows, okay, let's just look into this for a minute, you know, or let's not. Let's just file this for later. If something else comes up, we will. So, but the corporate environment should have the opportunity to at least have this on record. So tips are just a very, very easy, you know, prevention method to start with, right? So then we get into audits, okay? Internal, external audits, and management reviews. So those three, in my opinion, are kind of under the same bucket, all right? So any type of audit, you know, when we talk about external audits, this is bringing a company in. We don't even need to do anything this elaborate. You know, even a management review or an official audit is a great way to start. And what I would recommend, again, is starting small with these preventative techniques, okay? If we don't have any prevention in our organization, start off with some reviews. And they say management reviews. They don't have to be management reviews. They can be done by anyone within the organization, okay? And what they are basically is looking at the ecosystem. You know, where did we miss the mark? This is so important with prevention, okay? It's okay to make a mistake. Like I said, those cases that I've been involved in that we missed, it's okay we missed them, but look at the pain point. Where did we miss it? How could we have detected it? Okay, so what I would recommend, again, is focus on the tips, focus on those audits or just some sort of review process where you're looking at those cases, those big hits, the ones that are way up here, you know, in your exposure level, and focus on those first. Work backwards. And this is part of a vulnerability assessment, which is part of the preventative strategy that you can use, okay? So I want you to keep this in mind, kind of snapshot this, the percent detected, and if we can scroll down to the next one. And now let's look at what's actually the type that's being used, okay? So the type of control. And we can start to see that slide. So if we could, I wish we could just scroll down. Yeah, perfect, great, thank you. So that's how the first slide we looked at was initial detection. Now this here is talking about the type of control that's actually implemented. So these are what companies are using for this. So it's kind of like, this is what we want to do is compare this to the top one, okay? Kind of like what are we seeing? Are companies actually, mirroring the detection? So the top one is what's being detected. Those cases that did come through that were successful, that's how they were detected. This is what companies are actually using. So if we see here, it's close, but it doesn't really match up exactly, okay? So we see hotlines kind of a little bit lower on the list, 76%, okay? So if a company should, a company should match this with the initial detection. So this is why hotline should be first. So companies not many companies have hotline as their number one detection strategy, and they should. This is a human element. It's very, very easy to do, okay? So that should be number one. A lot of them use these audits, okay? And again, audits are important, but a lot of times, so here's the issue I see with audits, and I've done many of these, an external review, is that they're very, very in-depth, they're very strategic, but they don't have to be, okay? And this is the issue because sometimes just getting buy-in, even at a corporate level, can be difficult for prevention. So one of the things I would recommend is just even leveraging some of the talent that you have within your specific organization. Maybe identifying some person that's, really good with numbers, really good at reviewing, and maybe, add on a little task to them saying, okay, every month, every quarter, etc. What we're going to do is we're actually going to do a quick review, a snapshot review, look at those cases that came through. We're going to kind of maybe look at certain employees as a random check, on things that are going on. So these are things that are important and part of that vulnerability assessment I keep talking about that I'm going to get into in prevention. But these audits, again, if you look at what companies mainly are doing here, okay, code of conduct, very, very important. Very, very important as well. And companies are really utilizing that as well. And that's so important. That's part of that human element and human approach to this, okay? So if we look here at the different types, think to yourself, later when we get off this presentation, think, okay, how does my company measure up? What can we do that's a little bit different, okay? Or if anything, maybe we can, right? So just absorb this a little bit later, and then, we can come back to this. So if we can scroll up to the next one, I want to talk about the level of authority, okay? So level of authority, very interesting. So level of authority, now look at this interesting statistic. Look at this pie chart, right? So this shows the percentage of fraud that's committed and the level of authority. This is in your region. Now this actually depends. This is very specific to you because in certain regions, it's a third different, it's more higher level. So what you see here is the management level. Okay, the management level is the biggest threat, if you will, to this sort of fraud. And one of the reasons why is as follows, because these individuals, they have more authority, okay, than the operational level folks, okay, than the employees, than the blue, okay, but they don't have the, what I call the public, they're not out as much, they're not out there in these official capacities. So managers have that level of authority, but they can still what I call fly under the radar, right? Where you have upper levels of management, they have a lot of authority, but they can't fly under the radar because, a lot of times they have to answer to boards, they have to answer to, if you're a government agency, regulatory environment, but those managers can kind of fly under the radar, right? They can kind of keep to their tasks and do their duties without really many individuals, externally understanding what they're doing. Okay, so this is really interesting to me. Focus on this, but again, your mid-level managers are really the area to focus on from many different levels. Okay, so now we have an understanding. This was kind of phasing into the second part of the roadmap of, we want to kind of piece together. These are the types of corporate and occupational fraud that are dangerous, that we need to focus on specific in your region. So hopefully right now we have a nice snapshot from where we started a little while ago as to, okay, what is the problem, all right? So what I want to do now is I want to transition into the fun area, okay? So this is the psychological element, okay? The mindster, and this is an area where I absolutely love. There are tons and tons of research. As Dr. Harish mentioned, I devoted 3 years of my life to writing a book on this. So I've interviewed, I got asked a question in the media the other day, how many people have you interviewed? How many fraudsters? And I had to think about that for a minute. And I think it's probably around 200 or 300, I would say, in my career. And it's, on every different spectrum. And when I say that, those are the hardcore, those are the ones that didn't get away with it. I've spoken to many that did get away with it. So I would say that number is probably double or triple. So I would say I would myself make a pretty good fraudster, but I decided to take this route. So but knowing these internal workings is really exciting to me because here's what I find fascinating. the type of criminal that we're dealing with in our industry is different than any other, okay? And I'm going to walk through exactly why that is the case. And I'm going to draw on academics for this. And I'm going to talk about, you know, the criminological theories. And many of you maybe have taken some classes on this. You might even have majors in this. So this to some of you, you know, could be somewhat familiar. So when we talk about psychological theories, what we're talking about specifically is criminological theories, right? What drives criminal behavior? What drives these individuals to certain types of crimes? And in other criminal circles, this is what we do. We look at criminological elements and psychological elements, okay? Why does a juvenile delinquent, you know, why do they steal a marker? You know, why does a financial criminal, you know, pad an expense account? This is why we look at criminology and psychology, because what we want to do is we want to understand, one, why the individual did what they did. But secondly, most importantly, we want to develop a strategy. We want to develop, you know, get some things on the whiteboard. This is what we should do and this is what we shouldn't do, okay? This is the key to understanding the motivational factors. Because like I said before, if we don't understand our threat and our target market and what drives them, we absolutely can't develop a strategy for that. Okay, so this is why this is important. So when we talk about theories, all right, part of my journey in academics 15 years ago, I started to look at all of these theories and really dive into them, right? All psychological theories can fall under these three buckets: biological, psychological, and sociological, okay? And here's what I did. When I really started, I said, okay, which one of these theories, because this is what we do in other criminal circles, right? We apply these theories. We say, okay, all these sociological theories, and maybe these one or two apply, and let's do them. And these are not things that are just thrown out there. These theories have been around for you know, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. They've been applied and they work, right? These are not just, you know, kind of rudimentary theories. So what I did is I started to go through these theories myself and kind of check the box, say, yeah, this applies, this doesn't, this doesn't. So what I did is I started with biological theories. Okay, so biological theories, just as they state that biological factors, and I would say inborn, okay? So if this is the hey, professor, I have to leave in 2 minutes type question, this is all you have to know on this one, is inborn, okay? So biological factors have to do with inborn, okay? So these factors are inborn. And when I get it here, it's kind of like genetic makeup, DNA, okay? The fact that, you know, I can have a Starbucks triple latte coffee at 9 p.m. and still be okay and be able to get some sleep. Maybe Harish is different. Maybe if he has a coffee that late, he's up sending emails to everyone at 2 a.m., right? So these are biological genetic factors. These are inborn. We can't really alter those, right? So this is the question I ask. I say, okay, do any of these theories apply to you, to us in counter fraud and financial crime? Because, you know, I think I can't alter my propensity to accept or you know, my body to work with caffeine. So no, I don't look at any of those strategies for financial fraud. I don't think they apply because we can't develop any preventative strategies to adjust those things, right? So I cross that off. I then go to psychological, all right? Psychological factors, just like it sounds, right? Has to do with mental psyche and how the psyche actually brings behavior, right? So that's also inborn, but instead of biological, it's more mind-based, okay? And really what we look at specifically in criminal areas is mental deficiencies. So when you talk about the most heinous criminal serial killers, let's say Jeffrey Dahmer, right, Charles Manson, they're bucketed under that psychological school because they're just so deranged. So I look at our prevention. I'm getting to financial crime. I say, geez, is there anything we can do to adjust a mental psyche and the mental flaws of any of our people? No. Okay, so I cross all those hundreds of theories. So I start to get into sociological theories. And remember, I mentioned early on, the only thing you have to remember from this course, or this presentation, if anything, is reduce opportunity. This is where sociological theories come in play. Because just like they sound, sociological theories have to do with our environment, everything around us that drive our behavior, okay? Perfect example today. Harish didn't mention anything to me about showing up and wearing a tie or, you know, wearing a suit, right? But I decided, just due to external forces, sociological, environmental factors, this is how I was going to present myself today. Okay. If I showed up in a tank top and an Under Armour shirt and a baseball hat, okay, yes, I'm sure maybe you would still be here, but I might be received differently. Okay, so those are sociological factors. So those are environmental things that affected me today and affects all of us. Okay, so when I started to look at these theories, this is what's important. And I really recommend a lot of you dive. This is such a fascinating area. Sociological theories focus on controlling your environment. And they focus on how, if you control those environmental factors in your existence, they will absolutely affect behavior. Okay, I've been involved in millions of maybe not millions, but hundreds and hundreds of consultations where we have used these environmental factors and controlled them within your environment, within whatever space it is, and actually it has drastic effects, significant effects on fraud. Okay, so you can actually drive this behavior in many ways, and we're going to talk about that in the very next step on prevention itself. But this is an area I could spend a week talking on this because I'm so passionate about it and I love it. But I would really suggest to focus on this. And there's very specific sociological theories, specifically routine activities, cognitive learning. There's so many really cool theories to focus on here. But at the end of the day, here's the difference between the financial criminal and all other types of criminal. Based on these sociological factors, they are more cognitive. So they have the ability, all these criminals that we're talking about have the ability to choose between right and wrong. Okay, this is where rational choice theory comes in. This is probably, in my opinion, the strongest theory here that applies to what we're talking about this morning is rational choice. So these criminals have the ability to choose between right and wrong. Okay, so what that means, why that's so strong to us and so important for all of you is that you can develop strategies. If you disrupt that conundrum in their mind, they will make the right choice. You know, they all have that moment, you know, that crossroad where they're coming down and they can choose the legal way or the unethical, the ethical or unethical way, right? They can make that choice. They can. So that's what's different because other criminals, other criminal elements, they don't have that rational ability. So then your prevention is a whole different strategy, right? But you can absolutely have an effect on that, right? So now as we start to move into prevention, so if we can just scroll down here. So this is really where, you know, we call it all comes together because at the end of the day, you know, we're talking about these statistics, we're talking about these theories, but how do you apply this stuff? What does this mean to me in my space where I actually sit? Okay, so what we see here, and if we could just scroll down a little bit, what we see here is I'm going to recommend 3 approaches, okay, to prevention, okay? And this is what I'd like you to focus on because what I find it's kind of like fishing, right? If you throw out 3 lines, the chances of you catching a fish are greater than if you just throw out 1, right? It's kind of law of large numbers, law of averages, right? So what I want you to do is if you can focus a little bit on these 3 areas of prevention, then this absolutely will help. Now, what you can do first off is focus on the human element. Now, as you already saw by the detection strategies that are being used and that are successful, human strategies absolutely have an effect, right? So reduce the opportunity, look for ways to actually find those pain points. Like for example, in a vendor situation, what I would do is I would always have a second person involved in those vendor relations, okay? It's kind of like the 4 eyes principle. You know, very, very common accounting principle. You know, any type of authority that someone has, and specifically when we get at the vendor situation, have someone else always overseeing a payment, right, or an authority level. I would absolutely set authority levels with your management, okay? Make sure that all people that have certain level of authority have others that are watching. You know, it doesn't have to be a police type environment where you're watching every little thing that they do, but just a like I said, not an audit, but a review, you know, once a week, once a month. And what you want to do is you want to actually look for anything that's out of the norm for that individual, okay? So look to reduce those opportunities in different ways. Training, you would be so surprised at how much benefit you can get out of training. You know, this is a deeper dive into this area, but on a broader level, you can just do basic awareness training, and you wouldn't believe how much impact that really has, because a lot of these employees don't understand how that affects the corporate bottom line, how it affects the culture. Okay. Secondly, vacations, right? Promote taking vacations. It's unbelievable to me. Elizabeth Holmes, the case, the big blood case out in California, she never took a vacation. Right? Just one example. I've been involved in 2 big cases in Latin America. They never took vacations. And the reason why is because when you take a vacation, the chances of something happening while you're gone are very high. Someone calling in looking for a payment. One of the biggest cases I was involved in, this is exactly what happened. This individual was on the take with a vendor who was getting a kickback, and it was basically it was a bank situation, and they engaged in an outsourced vendor and human resource vendor, and he was getting a kickback on all these referrals. He was making a lot of money. I think when he was finally arrested, it was about $750,000. And exactly what he did was through just a vendor relationship, but he never took a vacation. And when he did, the second day, someone called in looking for a payment, and they realized it was a duplicate payment, that he had a whole separate kind of payment system set up for this. Okay, so definitely promote taking vacations. So alternately, if you see someone that's not taking a vacation, that could be a flag. Okay, so start to develop that. But again, getting back to that 4 eyes principle, always, no matter what you're doing, any type of cash involvement transaction, always have a second person looking at it. Again, it's a standard kind of audit accounting principle, but even at just a non-regulatory standard, it absolutely will help. Okay, so that human element should not be overlooked. Please always, look for ways to utilize that strength and strategies that you have within your organization. So before I get to technology, I want to talk about the vulnerability assessment, because I chatted about that a little bit. This is something that I've done so many times, and basically what you're doing with this vulnerability assessment is you're looking at those pain points within your organization. Okay, so you're looking at the whole ecosystem. Now, I have a formal process that I use. I have some Excel documents, things like that. If you guys ever want that, just let me know. I'm more than happy to send that to you. But it's really just looking at the ecosystem, starting with where your ecosystem starts and where it ends within your organization, within your company. And what you're doing is you're looking for those vulnerabilities, because I will tell you, I've seen vulnerabilities really early on in the process, even in marketing and sales folks, that were never included or even considered in fraud. I found 2 big cases in that area in a company because they were completely siloed, okay? All the way through in the end, even legal, even if you're talking about legal departments, they can get involved in these type of situations, okay? So make sure you're looking at that ecosystem, and that vulnerability assessment really focuses on that different area. And what you want to do is look at every little department, maybe look at it themselves, start a working group, and develop strategies to actually find those pain points and plug those holes, okay? So what I want to get into in the last little section is technology. So if we can scroll just like we almost did, yeah, perfect. So there are some really cool technology tools. As Dr. Harish mentioned, I consult with many companies, but one of the ones I've been heavily involved is Inform, and they develop products like this. So this is what's really cool, is when I do consult with them, I get to help develop and work with some of these things and actually see how they work. So here's something that I recommend, and this is what I call a footprint. Now, this is how the software program works. But really, it's just the concept that I want to introduce to you. So what this is your employee. This is John Smith on the left, right? These are all the data points that develop what I call a technological footprint, okay? So this is an employee. Every employee, all of you, have a technological DNA, okay? All of us do, whether it's the way we log on, whether it's the IP address, whether it's the sites we visit, whether it's the times we log in. All these things develop your profile. Okay, so what we do here is in these software programs, we develop this cognitive DNA footprint, technological DNA footprint of an employee, right? So what these checks will do is they will automatically in a real-time system work behind the scenes. And then if we scroll up a little further, this is what we see if anything falls outside of the norm. So we're going to see. And again, Dr. Harish, if we could just scroll up here to the next section, that'd be great. So what we're going to see here, so this is all good. Everything's green, everything's normal. Okay, but what software systems can do is they can detect anomalies. That is the key to using technology in preventing corporate and occupational fraud, is detecting anomalies. Anything outside of the ordinary on many different levels. Okay, so there's the employee level, and there's also the department level. All right, so what you want to do is you want to look at every little level. So, for example, if that employee, and once we scroll up, we can see this, but I can just verbally talk about this now. If any of these little cues here is out of the ordinary, so if we know that one of you, logs in at 8 a.m., but then we have a login this morning of 5 a.m. All right, okay, might not be a huge issue, but it's definitely an outlier. Okay, it's something out of the norm for that individual. Or an IP address that's different. Okay, that's absolutely something different that we need to look at, right? So these are all things that should be part of that issue, and part of that strategy that we look at is looking at developing a cognitive fingerprint of our employees, but also department level. We have to look at across the board. Okay, why are certain, especially payments, why are certain payments being made at certain levels, or et cetera, et cetera. And then if we could, Harish, if we could also scroll to a little bit further, I just want to show the last little slide here. And then what we also want to do, yeah, even further, yeah, the risk classification. Yeah, perfect, great, thank you. So what we do here is this is a risk classification. This is so important, okay? Because what we do here is we can use this technology to actually bring in, and this is what happens here. This is part of your ecosystem. So this is your employee, okay? This is your kind of your target, if you will. And what you're doing is you're constantly in a environment where a technology platform is assessing. These are some of the things that companies are using now as a risk classification of employees, and actually assessing and bringing in. So what we do is we bring in the employee into the system, into the server, if you will. And then we add on things as we go. And then you see the 26, this would be their risk assessment, risk classification score, right? But it could be high. Let's say we bring in third-party data sources of some sort. Could be whatever the corporate environment would dictate. We can bring in some of those sources. We can look at payments. Let's say individuals on a sanction list, right? Let's say certain payments then are issued to that individual from an employee. Okay, that's going to send this score through the roof. Right, so we can bring in third-party data sources. We can also use data that's within the corporate environment itself. And this again goes back to, remember what I said in the beginning about leveraging the information, the data that's out there. This is a way to do that. This is a way to loop all this together and develop this risk classification score. Okay, so these are just two really quick examples of technology and how it can be used, but it's so exciting. There's so much robustness to all of this. And we're seeing a lot of really great results with using these platforms. But what I will say is this, as kind of a few final comments as we wrap this up. What I would say is again, I think we've developed a knowledge base here that this is definitely an issue, that this is definitely something that companies should be looking at. If it's not on your corporate radar, definitely make sure it is, because now we also delved into the psychological elements of it. Okay, on what drives these individuals. And we see now it's all a matter of opportunity. If we can reduce that opportunity coming in, because again, they can make that decision right here, between ethical and non-ethical behavior. We have to put those systems in place to actually prevent that behavior. You don't want to be, one of those companies that has the 85% red flags that go on for 16 months and 130,000 a case. We don't want to be that company, okay? Because these are easily identified. As we saw, most of these 85% of them have a red flag. Okay, so we should not have missed it. Okay, but utilize this technology, and as a final word, like I said, just try to reduce the opportunity when you can. Look to leverage whatever strengths you have within your particular organization. If you can't utilize these software programs, you can even just utilize basic Excel formats, access systems. Whatever it is you can utilize, on an analyst level to help prevent this. But this should definitely be something that's on your radar. And I think, again, I could keep talking for hours and hours and hours. I know you've all had a long day. Dr. Harish, is there any final words, any chat, any questions for me? And of course, my information, if you scroll down, is right on the bottom. You guys, please feel free connect. I love to connect with you, so I'm all on LinkedIn and YouTube, Facebook. Please find me on there, connect with me, and I'd love to hear from you. If I can help you out at all in the future, support you, please let me know. But yeah, there's all my information. And again, I look forward to continuing the relationship with you. I don't consider this just a one-time thing. I love to get involved with you guys and help you on your journey.
Yes, Mr. Michael, thank you very much. It was a nice session. Now, let me take, because of it is a time constraint, so let me take 2 to 3 questions. The questions which have been asked by the viewer is, the first question is, what kind of vulnerability tools do you use, and can you send some example? Can you give some examples of these, the risk assessment tools which you have used for these, for identification of corporate frauds?
Okay, yep, so like talking about the vulnerability assessment. Okay, yep, so with the vulnerability assessment, one of the things that I have seen is that most of the employees that commit this type of fraud, what I have found, usually have been with the company about 5 years. So that seems to be kind of the, I don't know, in my mind, what I have seen in my experience. So that seems to be where it starts. So what I usually do in a vulnerability assessment is I look at the types of cases, that one affected me as a company, but then I also look a little bit locally, maybe through some networking. And then what I do is you develop a strategy, a risk classification strategy, whatever tools you can use. So in that specific example, in that corporate environment that I was just talking about, we found a big spike at that like 5 to 7 year mark with the employees. Okay, so what we did was we developed strategy. We developed a risk tool which actually identified, okay, what employees have been there 5 or 7 years. Okay, so then we kind of looked at that as a trigger, a step one. So that was the first thing. Secondly, we looked at their authority level. Okay, because we were looking at certain levels of authority. We found in that situation, it was really being all being done by padding expense accounts. So that was huge within the company. And we found it came from the manager. It came from the manager within the unit that kind of, accepted that culture. And that kind of got disseminated into the employees. So we had 8 employees that were all padding their expense accounts, and that added up into huge numbers. So I would say, in my opinion, the expense account is a great place to start. Look at anomalies, look at those employees specifically that have a lot of flexibility with their expense accounts. Maybe individuals, like I see a lot with sales folks, field-based folks, because they, their expense accounts are huge, so they can pad a lot of different things in there. So that's what I would recommend. Those are, in my opinion, some of the good places to start.
Yeah. Second question. How can we leverage blockchain technology in financial fraud detection? How it could be useful to us?
Oh boy, that's a session we should book for another hour. Yeah, so blockchain. Oh boy, that's just such a hot topic, and I'm so glad you brought this up because, blockchain technology. I have seen. I don't know. I've consulted with companies, and again with Inform, we have very advanced machine learning AI technology, right? And this gets into blockchain as well. And what I found with blockchain is, blockchain creates those, helps create those profiles and those patterns, and that's really the key to focusing in on this. So what I would do is I would look at, the blockchain technology will work in a scenario where you have someone that can manage that process, okay? Because this is what I've seen, because it's very similar to, like I look at blockchain similar to ML and AI functionality, because what you have to do is you have to train. A lot of times I think what companies think is they think it's a plugin, right? They think they can take this and simply plug it in the blockchain technology and it's going to work. But that is absolutely contrary to the benefits, because what you have to do is you have to teach these systems what to look for, right? You can't just plug them in, because each of you on this call, if I asked you what your strategy was, what your book of business, your line of business, it's all going to be different, right? So all your focuses on prevention are going to be absolutely different. So blockchain technology, I've seen it work, but it has to be managed by some individuals that twofold, and these are rare, one that have the technology background that can actually dive into the weeds and be able to adjust the technology, but two, have a very nice understanding of the fraud element as well. And what I find is that usually you have one or the other. You have a high, someone that's really advanced in fraud but doesn't have that technological element, or vice versa. So if you have a team where you have a mix of those people, absolutely. So again, at a very high level, and again, we can have a whole other class on this, but I would say with blockchain, use it, but use it cautiously, and you have to set those parameters on what you're going to be using it for. It's not going to know what to look for, what profiles, how to develop it, what to give back to you if you don't train it ahead of time and give it the right types of data to go into the system. So that's the second part, is make sure you got the, do a data analysis first and see what you have in your data IT ecosystem, and can you get it in that blockchain technology first. Great question.
Yeah. And now let me take one more question. In certain cases, where the employees are visiting the client's places and they have been paid certain expenses by the company. Those expenses, the employees who are visiting the organization, they're putting bill for it. In certain cases, the mechanism is not set in a way where these expenses could be tracked over, that where these expenses have been incurred for. So the question is how we can keep a track on those kinds of expenses. So, the kind of the expenses which happened for the organization could be tracked in properly.
Okay, so these are, I understand, these are employees that they don't have to actually put these things on the books internally with the corporate environment. These are, they bill or get paid externally, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so any type of vendor. Okay, yeah, and this falls right under the, unfortunately, like the corruption kickback type of area, because this is where that threat occurs. Because what you're relying on is the ethical and moral compass of the employee, right, to actually report or not report it. And what you find is, again, as I mentioned, when you have that opportunity that's there, unfortunately, some individuals, because of that road behind it, like I said here, will take that situation. Now, what I would recommend in something like that is I would start with more of a human approach first, and I would discuss, through training and a strong culture, a code of conduct environment. What I would do in a situation like that maybe is I would start with some strong human elements, like to look at it, some sort of quarterly ethical statement that they have to sign per se, or attest to, because this actually will trigger morality. Studies have shown that when they do this, when they actually sign a document and say, hey, this is, everything I've reported the prior quarter is true and accurate, those things do have an effect. Okay, so I think that one step, the human element, will help. I think secondly, one way to do that is to somehow think creatively, because really you're only relying on the human on their reporting of that. Somehow see if creatively you can use technology to maybe find the high risk employees there. Maybe those ones that are, visiting more, or like that someone's visiting a certain type of individual or engaged in a certain company 3 times a week, as opposed to someone else that's 1 time. If you can find those outliers, maybe in metrics, get creative. That will, I think, identify some risks to you to say, yeah, that person has a higher propensity to be a vulnerability to us because they have more opportunity. So the more opportunity is what you have to look for, and that's going to key in on what areas to focus. So I think using a mix of both, that human approach and some metrics. And again, if the individual asks that question would like to follow up with me later, I can more than happy to brainstorm on that.
Yes. Yeah, okay, Mr. Michael Skiba, thank you very much. We have many questions in a queue, but we have details of yours on website, and it is live kept over here. So further aspirants would contact you for their clearing their doubts. Finally, I have gone through your whole presentation in a detailed way. If I will be sharing my opinion, It has been shared in an excellent way, corporate and occupational fraud schemes, step by step. It has been explained in a proper way. Then, you had correlated with the psychological perspectives of the people and what leads to the occupational and corporate frauds in the organization. And finally, the case study which you had taken, that is an excellent one, because you talked about, I had rightly mentioned over here, technological DNA of the employees. So if you will have the data of all those things which your employee come across in the organization, and if you will have a proper data analytics tools and technology, then you can be rightly classified or bifurcate the risk which is associated with the organization. So that is an excellent presentation, statistically present, plus the theoretically also it has been present in an excellent way. I thank you on behalf of National Forensic Science University. I thank you for accepting our invitation, and personally thank you for waking up early in the morning and delivering the session at 7 a.m. at your time. Thank you, Mr. Skiba. Thanks a lot. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It was my pleasure, Harish. Yeah, I look forward to dialoguing with you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. I'll see you personally on our call.